At my sister Chloe's wedding, my parents demanded I hand over my penthouse keys right in front of 300 guests. I looked them in the eye and simply said no. My mother slapped me so hard my diamond earring flew across the floor. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly bent down, picked up my earring, walked straight out to the valet, and made one single phone call. Exactly an hour later, the heavy oak doors of the reception hall burst open. A man in a tailored suit walked in, flanked by private security. When my mother saw who it was, she dropped her champagne glass and started screaming. "My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and before I tell you how that one phone call completely dismantled my family's fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against people who were supposed to protect you." The reception was being held at one of the most exclusive venues in Atlanta. It was a lavish $200,000 display of wealth, dripping with cascading white orchids and shimmering crystal chandeliers. The music was vibrating through the floorboard's top shelf. Champagne was flowing freely, and my mother was in her absolute element. Valerie, known to everyone as the flawless first lady of our megachurch, glided through the room as if she were royalty. My father, Deacon Jamal, stood by her side, soaking up the admiration of their congregation. Everything had to look perfectly prosperous and undeniably blessed. I was standing quietly near a massive swan ice sculpture, trying to keep a low profile and just make it through the night. I wore a simple but elegant emerald gown, sipping sparkling water and observing the spectacle. That was when I felt them closing in. Suddenly, I was boxed into the corner by my mother, my father, my 29-year-old sister Chloe, who was basking in her golden child glory, and her brand-new husband Preston. Preston was a white man. They paraded around like a trophy. My parents constantly bragged that he was a highly successful venture capitalist, treating his presence in our family as the ultimate symbol of having arrived in high society. Preston stood there with a smug, entitled grin on his face, swirling his expensive bourbon. Chloe clung to his arm, wearing her custom designer gown, looking at me with that familiar childhood condescension. My mother stepped right into my personal space, her expensive perfume practically choking me. Her smile was tight and terrifyingly fake, designed to look pleasant to any guest glancing our way, but her eyes were cold and furious. "Nia," my mother whispered, her tone sharp and urgent. "Preston and Chloe have decided they need to move into your downtown penthouse by the end of the month. Preston needs a luxury home office to host his high-net-worth investors, and your place has the perfect skyline view. Hand over the keys tonight so they can start moving their things in tomorrow." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if the champagne had gone to her head. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "You want me to give up the home I bought with my own money so your new son-in-law can use it as an office?" Preston chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves. "Come on, Nia. It is just real estate. You run a little boutique agency. You do not need all that space. I am dealing with millions of dollars in venture capital. I need to project a certain image to my clients. It is for the good of the family brand." My father chimed in, adjusting his tailored tuxedo jacket. "Listen to your brother-in-law, Nia. He is doing big things. It is time you finally pull your weight around here." I looked from my father to Preston, then to my sister, who was practically glowing with greed. "No," I said softly but firmly. "My home is not available for you to play pretend." My mother's fake smile vanished instantly. Her face contorted with a rage she usually kept hidden behind church doors. She leaned in so close I could feel her breath on my cheek. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," she hissed, her voice trembling with venom. "You run a little event planning hobby. You do not deserve that penthouse. Do something useful for this family for once. Be a good sister, just like when you gave up your Howard University tuition so Chloe could buy her pageant dresses. You owe us this." The sheer audacity of her bringing up my stolen college fund, the money I had worked multiple jobs in high school to save, only for them to drain the account to fund Chloe's superficial hobbies, was staggering. They had always treated my sacrifices as their entitlement. "I am not giving you my keys," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the nearby music. And I am not funding Chloe's lifestyle anymore. What happened next was a blur of motion. My mother's hand swung through the air with vicious speed. The slap echoed over the thumping bass of the music. It was so forceful that my head snapped to the side and my diamond earring was ripped from my earlobe, skittering across the polished marble floor. The music seemed to grind to a halt. Conversations abruptly stopped. 300 guests turned their heads, their eyes wide with shock, staring at the First Lady of the church who had just physically assaulted her own daughter. The silence was deafening. My father looked panicked, glancing around at his congregation. Chloe gasped, but Preston just smirked, clearly enjoying the show. My cheek burned with the fiery, stinging heat, but I did not cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of my tears. I slowly knelt down in my emerald gown, my movements deliberate and entirely unbothered. I picked up my diamond earring from the cold floor, stood back up, and looked my mother dead in the eyes. I saw a flicker of genuine fear cross her face as she realized I was not the terrified 18-year-old girl she used to bully. I turned on my heel and walked out of the grand hall. I strode straight past the gaping guests, past the towering floral arrangements, and out the front doors into the cool Atlanta night air. I walked up to the valet stand, pulled my phone from my clutch, and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Mr. Sterling," I said, when the deep voice answered. "It is Nia. It is time to execute the protocol. Shut it all down." I stood by my car waiting in the shadows. Exactly 1 hour later, the heavy oak doors of the reception hall burst open. A tall, imposing man in a meticulously tailored suit marched into the venue, flanked by 3 massive private security guards. Through the glass panels, I watched my mother turn around. When she saw who had just walked into her perfect expensive party, she dropped her crystal champagne glass and started screaming. The sharp, explosive crash of crystal against marble cut through the heavy bass of the rhythm and blues track pumping from the speakers. The glass shattered into 100 glittering pieces across the dance floor. My mother Valerie stood completely paralyzed, her hands still hovering in the empty air where her drink had been just a second before. Her jaw unhinged as she stared at the entrance in pure disbelief. At 60 years old, Mr. Sterling was a man who commanded absolute authority without ever having to raise his voice. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit and carried a sleek black leather briefcase moving with the kind of predatory grace you only see in high-powered corporate attorneys. Flanking him were 3 massive private security guards, each built like a tank, completely unfazed by the sea of expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos parting nervously before them. I stepped back through the grand double doors right behind his security detail, folding my arms and watching the beautiful destruction unfold. My mother snapped out of her initial shock and immediately went on the offensive, her face flushing with a desperate, ugly rage. "Get him out of here!" she screeched, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Sterling. "Security! Where is the venue security? This man is ruining my daughter's perfect mixed family wedding. Remove him from my sight immediately." Sterling did not even blink. He raised one hand, giving a subtle practice signal to his men. One of the massive guards bypassed the frantic wedding planner, marched straight over to the DJ booth, and simply reached down and ripped the main audio cord from the soundboard. The sudden deafening silence that rushed into the hall was heavier and more suffocating than the music had been. 300 guests, including half of my father's megachurch congregation, froze in place. You could hear the ice melting in the cocktail glasses. My father, Deacon Jamal, puffed out his chest and stepped in front of my mother. He tried to project the righteous, booming authority he used every Sunday at the pulpit to keep his flock in line. "Now see here, sir," my father barked, adjusting his silk lapels. "I do not know who you are or why Nia brought you here, but this is a private family event. You are trespassing and you are severely upsetting the bride." Before Sterling could speak, Chloe pushed past our parents, dragging her heavy custom lace gown across the marble floor. She looked Sterling up and down, her lip curled in the exact same expression of absolute disgust she had used on me since we were teenagers. "You are working with Nia." She laughed a shrill, condescending sound that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. That is genuinely hilarious. She is a glorified event planner who lives in a rented apartment. She probably hired you off the internet to throw a tantrum because she is bitter and jealous of Preston. She is just a lonely, pathetic woman trying to steal my spotlight because no man will ever look at her the way Preston looks at me. Preston stepped up right next to Chloe, swirling the amber bourbon in his glass. He flashed that arrogant, privileged smile he always wore when dealing with our family, the smile of a white man who believed his mere presence elevated us. "Look, buddy," Preston said, his voice dripping with fake corporate authority. "I do not know what kind of pathetic stunt my sister-in-law is pulling, but you are trespassing on a $200,000 wedding. I deal with millions of dollars in venture capital every single day. I know the police commissioner personally. Leave right now before I call my guys downtown and have you locked up for harassment." Sterling looked at Preston the way one might look at a stain on the bottom of an expensive shoe. He calmly clicked open his black leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, watermarked legal document. He unfolded the crisp paper with deliberate, agonizing slowness, letting the tension in the room build until it was practically choking the guests. "I am not here at the behest of an event planner," Sterling said, his voice deep, resonant, and carrying effortlessly to the very back row of the stunned crowd. "I am the executor for the estate of the late Ruby Thomas, known to you as Big Mama. But more importantly for tonight's gathering, I am the lead legal counsel for Crown Estates Limited Liability Company." My mother crossed her arms, her face twisting into a mask of arrogant confusion. "We rented this resort from Crown Estates," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly. "We are VIP clients. The regional manager personally guaranteed our reservation. What does any of that have to do with Nia throwing a fit over her apartment keys?" Sterling offered a cold, razor-sharp smile. "It has everything to do with her, Valerie." He stepped forward, holding the document out so the entire front row of guests could clearly see the official state seals and signatures. "Nia is not an event planner. 3 years ago, when this luxury resort filed for bankruptcy and was quietly put up for auction, Crown Estates purchased the property in full." He paused, letting his cold eyes sweep across my parents and my sister. "Nia is the sole owner and chief executive officer of Crown Estates. She is not a guest at your wedding. She is your landlord." The collective gasp from 300 guests hit the room like a physical wave. The church elders in the front row started whispering furiously to one another. Chloe's face lost every ounce of its color, turning a sickly ashen gray as she stared at me. Preston froze completely, the smug, arrogant smile melting off his face as his eyes darted from the legal deed in Sterling's hands to my calm expression. My father staggered back a half step, his mouth opening and closing silently as he tried to process how the middle daughter he had constantly belittled, the one he had called a failure just an hour ago, owned the very ground he was standing on. "No!" My mother shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic and frantic denial. "You are a liar." She begged us to pay her tuition at Howard University, and we took that money and gave it to Chloe so she could buy her pageant dresses because Nia was entirely useless. She does not have that kind of money. She is a complete fraud. Sterling did not argue. He did not raise his voice or acknowledge her insult. He simply reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a sleek silver clipboard, handing it directly to my mother. Attached to it was a financial statement and a formal legal notice printed in bold red ink. "Your final deposit for this reception bounced 2 days ago," Sterling announced, making absolutely sure the entire room heard every single syllable of his next sentence. "You attempted to pay the remaining balance with a fraudulent cashier's check. By order of the property owner, you are in severe breach of contract." He tapped the clipboard with a heavy gold pen. "You have exactly 10 minutes to evacuate all 300 of your guests from these premises before you are formally charged with trespassing." "Now wait just a damn minute." The voice cut through the stunned, breathless silence of the reception hall. Preston stepped out from behind my sister, pushing his way to the front. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his height and his pristine, tailored tuxedo to intimidate Mr. Sterling. The air in the room shifted immediately. You could practically smell the sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating off him. He pointed a rigid finger directly at Sterling's face, leaning heavily on the corporate privilege my parents practically worshipped. "I do not care what piece of paper you think you are holding," Preston barked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You do not barge into my wedding reception and threaten my family. Do you have any idea who I am? I manage a $50 million venture capital fund. I play golf with the judges in this district. I have powerful connections all over Atlanta. I will have my legal team sue your holding company into absolute oblivion before the ink even dries on that ridiculous eviction notice. You and Nia think you can pull a fast one with some bankrupt shell company. I will bury you both. I will make sure her little real estate hobby is liquidated by Monday morning." Sterling did not flinch. He did not step back. He simply looked at Preston with the bored, unimpressed expression of a man who swatted away empty threats for a living. The heavy oak doors creaked as I walked back into the reception hall. The cool night air outside had completely calmed my nerves, and my diamond earring was securely back in place. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I did not look at my father, who was still speechless, or my mother, who looked like she might faint. My eyes were locked entirely on Preston. In my hands, I carried a thick, heavy manila folder. It was the culmination of 6 months of late-night digging, forensic accounting, and expensive private investigations. "You are not suing anyone, Preston," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the dead silent room. I walked straight up to the massive 7-tier wedding cake that my mother had bragged about for months. I raised the heavy folder and slammed it down onto the cake table with a resounding thud. The crystal cake stand rattled, and a collective gasp rippled through the front row of guests. Because a lawsuit requires a legitimate business, I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his, and yours does not exist. I watched his gaze dart to the thick folder on the table. For the first time all night, that arrogant, untouchable frat boy smirk faltered. A subtle sheen of sweat broke out across his forehead. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting frantically around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of the 300 guests watching his every move. He reached up and tugged at his silk bow tie, as if the room had suddenly grown too hot. His perfectly styled hair seemed to lose its form. The confident, wealthy venture capitalist facade was cracking right before my eyes, crumbling under the weight of the truth sitting on the table. "What is this nonsense, Nia?" my father demanded, stepping forward, though his booming preacher voice lacked its usual conviction. I ignored him, keeping my focus on the sweating groom. "That folder contains bank records, offshore wire transfers, and shell company registrations," I announced, making absolutely sure my voice carried to the back of the room. "I spent the last 6 months investigating your brilliant new son-in-law. He does not run a venture capital firm. He runs a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. And his absolute favorite targets are minority-owned small businesses right here in Atlanta. He uses his charm, his race, and his supposed high society connections to convince hardworking Black entrepreneurs to hand over their life savings, promising them massive returns. Then he funnels that cash into hidden accounts to pay off his previous investors." The whispers in the room exploded into loud gasps and angry muttering. Several of my father's wealthy church members, the very business owners Preston had been aggressively schmoozing during cocktail hour, began to look visibly sick. "You are out of your mind," Preston spat, but his voice cracked. He wiped his sweating forehead with the back of his hand, suddenly looking like he could not breathe. "You are just a jealous, bitter woman making up lies to ruin Chloe's night." "Lies." I laughed, a sharp, cold sound that offered zero comfort. "Page 4 of that file lists the $4 million you currently owe to a syndicate of private, unregulated lenders. Very dangerous people, Preston. The kind of people who do not take you to civil court when they are owed money. They sent you a final notice last week. You are completely broke, drowning in debt, and absolutely desperate." I turned to look at my mother. She was clutching her chest, her expensive makeup standing out starkly against her pale skin. "And that is exactly why he is standing at this altar today. Valerie, you could not stop bragging at every country club lunch and Sunday service about Big Mama Ruby's massive $15 million trust fund. You painted a giant financial target on your own daughter's back." Preston did not sweep Chloe off her feet because he loved her. He targeted her because he thought marrying into this church family was his golden ticket. He needed a bailout to save his own life, and he needed it today. I took a slow step closer to Preston, watching him shrink back. That is why he demanded the keys to my penthouse an hour ago, I said, my tone dripping with disgust. He did not need a luxury home office to host clients. He needed a high-value asset he could leverage. He needed a prestigious address that made him look solvent, so his creditors would not break his legs before he could get his hands on Big Mama's money. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the crushing weight of the revelation. Chloe stood frozen in her custom lace dress, her lavish bridal bouquet trembling violently in her hands. The fairy tale she had bought into the wealthy progressive prince she thought she had secured to finally outshine me was evaporating into thin air. She turned to Preston, her perfect bridal makeup ruined by a sudden stream of dark tears. Preston, Chloe sobbed, reaching out a shaking hand to grab his tuxedo jacket. Preston, look at me. Tell me she is lying. Tell them she is just making this up. For a split second, Preston looked at her. His eyes were wild, darting around the room like a cornered animal, realizing there was no escape. The charming, privileged persona was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, terrifying panic. Instead of comforting the woman he had married less than 4 hours ago, Preston violently shoved Chloe aside. She stumbled backward with a sharp cry, tripping over the heavy train of her gown and colliding hard with the edge of the cake table. Preston did not even look back to see if she was hurt. He lunged past her toward my mother, his face twisted in a manic, aggressive snarl. Valerie, give me the check, he demanded, his voice breaking into a guttural, terrifying scream that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Give me the trust fund advance right now, or I am a dead man. The echo of Preston's scream had barely faded before the entire illusion of the flawless church family shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Chloe, who had spent her entire life cultivating the image of a delicate, untouchable princess, suddenly turned feral. She let out a guttural shriek that tore through her throat and launched herself directly at Preston's back. Her heavy custom-imported lace train ripped loudly as her heels slipped on the polished marble, but she did not care. She slammed into him, her manicured nails clawing wildly at his tailored tuxedo jacket, ripping the expensive silk lapels right off his shoulders. Preston let out a yelp of shock and spun around wildly, swinging his arms to shove his bride away. They crashed backward into the sprawling dessert table. The massive 7-tier cake toppled over, sending a tidal wave of vanilla buttercream and white fondant splashing across the floor and ruining Chloe's $200,000 bridal gown. The 300 guests erupted into pure, unfiltered chaos. Gasps turned into shouts. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor as people scrambled backward to avoid the flying icing and shattered crystal. But nobody left. Instead, dozens of cell phones instantly shot up into the air, the harsh glare of camera flashes illuminating the humiliating spectacle. The pristine, dignified First Family of Atlanta was brawling on the floor like common thugs, and the entire congregation was recording every single second of it in high definition. My father's face flushed a dangerous deep shade of crimson. He lunged forward, grabbing Preston by the collar of his ruined shirt and yanking him backward, nearly lifting the man entirely off his feet. "Stop it, Deacon!" Jamal roared, his voice cracking under the strain of absolute panic. "Put those phones away right now. This is a private family matter. Put the cameras down." But the crowd ignored him, their screens steadily capturing the utter destruction of his carefully curated brand. My mother dropped to her knees in the cake batter, her expensive silk gown soaking up the mess, frantically trying to pull Chloe away from Preston. "Chloe, stop this instant," Valerie hissed, digging her fingers into my sister's bare arms. "You are embarrassing us in front of the elders. Maintain your composure. You are a wife now." Chloe ripped her arm out of my mother's grasp, her breathing heavy and ragged. Her perfect updo had unraveled, sending chunks of hair falling across her icing-smeared face. "I am a wife to a deadbeat," Chloe screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Preston, who was currently cowering behind my father. "You think I did not know, Preston? You think I am completely stupid? I found the collection notices stuffed in your golf bag 3 weeks ago. I knew you were broke. I knew your fancy venture capital firm was a sham." Preston's eyes widened in genuine shock, wiping a smear of buttercream off his cheek. "You knew," he stammered, his voice pitching high with disbelief. "If you knew I was drowning in $4 million of syndicate debt, why the hell did you still walk down the aisle today? Why didn't you cancel the wedding?" Chloe let out a wet, hyperventilating sob and wrapped her arms protectively around her stomach. "Because I am pregnant, you absolute idiot!" she wailed, the words echoing loudly across the silent room. Cell phone cameras zoomed in closer. "I am pregnant, and I was not about to let Mom and Dad parade me around the church as an unwed mother. You were supposed to be my cover story. You were supposed to use Big Mama's trust fund to fix your mess and give me the luxury life you promised." My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands as she looked at Chloe's stomach. But it was my father who suddenly connected the dots of this financial disaster. "Wait a minute," my father demanded, stepping away from Preston and glaring at his favorite daughter. "If Preston was completely bankrupt 3 weeks ago, and our deposit to this venue bounced, how did you pay for the florist? How did you pay for the caterers? Where did the money for this reception come from, Chloe?" Chloe shrank back, her eyes darting nervously toward me. She swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a guilty, trembling whisper. "The family business account. I forged Nia's signature on the boutique agency ledgers. I funneled $100,000 into a dummy account to cover the vendor deposits so the wedding would not be canceled. I figured we would just pay it back once the trust fund cleared on Monday." I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer magnitude of her confession wash over the room. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of the frantic bride and the soft clicks of smartphone cameras. And then I laughed. It started as a low chuckle deep in my chest and quickly grew into a dark, bitter, resounding laugh that filled the entire reception hall. The sound was so entirely void of warmth that it made my father flinch. "You forged my signature," I said, taking a slow, measured step toward my sister who was currently trembling in her ruined dress. "You committed felony wire fraud to buy white orchids and champagne." I looked past her to my parents, my gaze locking onto my father's horrified face. "Do you remember what happened when I was 16 years old, Dad? Do you remember the Sunday afternoon you found $500 missing from the church offering plate?" My father swallowed hard, refusing to meet my eyes. I did not let him look away. I took another step forward. "Chloe bought herself a pair of designer heels that exact same week. But when you asked where the money went, she pointed her finger right at me. She told you I stole it, and you believed her immediately. You did not ask for proof. You did not look at the facts. You dragged me into your church office, locked the door, and beat me with your leather belt until I could barely walk. You called me a thief. And Mom, you stood in front of the entire congregation the next Sunday and asked them to pray for your wayward, sinful daughter. You publicly humiliated me to protect her." I gestured sharply toward Chloe, who was now weeping loudly into her hands. "Well, take a really good look at your golden child now. She is a proven fraud, a documented thief, and she is carrying the child of a white-collar criminal who scammed your own parishioners. This is the legacy you chose over me." My father looked around at the hundreds of eyes staring back at him in pure judgment. The silence was suffocating thick with the complete and utter destruction of his pristine reputation. His chest heaved as he frantically searched for a lifeline, any possible way to regain control of his collapsing empire. He clapped his hands together with a loud, desperate smack. "Enough," my father roared, his voice booming through the hall as he forced a terrifyingly wide, manic smile onto his face. "None of this matters. We are making a mountain out of a molehill. Families have disagreements, and we will handle ours privately through the grace of God." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "We are still deeply blessed. We still have Big Mama Ruby's $15 million estate. We will simply liquidate the ancestral home on Monday morning. We will pay off Preston's unfortunate debts, we will refund the business accounts, and we will protect this family's good name. The church will stand stronger than ever." From the shadows near the DJ booth, Mr. Sterling quietly cleared his throat. The crisp, authoritative sound instantly drew every eye in the room. He calmly reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced a small silver flash drive. He did not say a single word to my father. He simply stepped past the unplugged soundboard, plugged the flash drive directly into the DJ's laptop, and pressed play. The massive floor-to-ceiling LED screen suspended above the polished dance floor had been looping a tasteless, glittering gold monogram of Chloe and Preston's initials all night. Suddenly, the bright gold letters flickered and died. A deep, heavy darkness swallowed the center of the room. The 300 guests held their collective breath. I stood perfectly still near the ruined cake table, watching my parents' silhouettes freeze in the blue glow of the venue's backup lights. Then a sharp, pristine white light snapped onto the screen so blindingly bright it forced my mother to shield her eyes. The camera slowly dollies back, capturing the horrifying scale of the moment. Dwarfed beneath the towering digital display, my family looked like tiny, pathetic statues cast in shadow. Above them, larger than life and radiating absolute authority, was Big Mama Ruby. The video had been recorded exactly 2 months before she passed away. She did not look like the frail, fading woman my parents had paraded around during her final weeks to drum up sympathy from their mega-church congregation. She sat tall in her signature high-backed emerald velvet armchair, draped in her favorite silk robe and wearing the heavy pearl necklace my grandfather had given her 50 years ago. Her mind was razor-sharp. Her posture was regal. Her dark eyes stared straight down through the camera lens, cutting right into the soul of the room. The venue's state-of-the-art surround sound system, which my mother had insisted on upgrading at a premium, crackled to life. If you are watching this, Big Mama's rich, gravelly voice boomed across the reception hall. It means I am resting in glory, and my foolish daughter has finally managed to throw her ridiculous society wedding. I imagine you are all wearing your most expensive clothes, drinking champagne I paid for, and pretending to be the perfect blessed family. A collective gasp echoed from the church elders in the front row. My father lunged toward the DJ booth, his hands frantically reaching for the laptop to cut the feed, but the largest of Mr. Sterling's security guards simply stepped in his path. The guard crossed his massive arms silently, daring my father to try it. Jamal stumbled backward, his face draining of all color as Big Mama's voice continued to vibrate through the floorboards. "You see, I have been sitting quietly in my sunroom for the last 5 years," Big Mama said, leaning slightly forward in her chair, her gaze piercing through the digital screen. "You all thought I was just a senile, tired old woman staring at the birds. You thought I did not notice the bank statements arriving in the mail. You thought I did not know how to check my own retirement accounts." My mother let out a strangled, high-pitched whimper. She grabbed the edge of the ruined cake table with both hands to keep from collapsing entirely, her knuckles turning white. "Valerie Jamal." Big Mama's tone dropped to a lethal quiet register that commanded absolute silence. "You really thought you were being clever. You thought you could secretly siphon $300,000 out of my retirement portfolio to buy Chloe that brand new Range Rover and fund her lavish lifestyle. You justified stealing from your own dying mother because you were so desperate to maintain this illusion of wealth for your congregation. You built a house of lies and you bought it with my hard-earned money." The whispers among the guests turned into audible exclamations of shock. Women covered their mouths and men shook their heads in utter disgust. My father, the supposedly righteous deacon who preached about integrity and moral fortitude every single Sunday, was publicly exposed as a thief who robbed his dying mother. He covered his face with his hands, visibly trembling as his entire reputation was incinerated in front of his flock. And Chloe Big Mama continued, not sparing my sister for a second. "You let them do it. You paraded around in luxury cars bought with stolen money, acting like you were better than everyone else. You chased status instead of substance, and you ended up with exactly what you deserve. A fraud." Preston tried to back away toward the emergency exit, sensing the walls closing in, but a second security guard smoothly shifted to block the double doors. There was no way out. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. Big Mama shifted in her chair, her eyes locking onto the camera with a fierce protective intensity. She raised her chin, and for the first time in the video, a small, proud smile touched her lips. "Valerie, you called Nia a failure," Big Mama said, her voice echoing with maternal fury. "You called her a disappointment. You beat her, you humiliated her, and you kicked her out because she refused to be a prop in your fake little church show. You told her she was useless because she did not marry a doctor or a lawyer. You sold out your own blood to buy white approval, throwing your favorite daughter at the first scammer in a tailored suit who promised you high society status. My mother was weeping openly now, thick streaks of expensive mascara running down her face, destroying the flawless First Lady image she had worshipped her entire life. But while you were busy chasing shadows and begging for a seat at tables that do not matter, Nia built an empire. Big Mama declared, her voice rising with undeniable pride. She built a kingdom with her own 2 hands. She bought the very ground you are standing on tonight. She did not need a man to give her a name because she made her own. And I am putting a stop to this generational curse today. The reception hall was so quiet, you could hear the rapid, ragged breathing of my sister still sitting in the cake batter on the floor. Mr. Sterling stood quietly by the DJ booth, his hands folded neatly in front of him, watching my family's empire turn to dust. This brings me to my final testament. Big Mama announced, her expression hardening into absolute stone. I will not allow the wealth my husband and I built through sweat and tears to be squandered by greedy, superficial thieves. Valerie, Jamal, and Chloe. As of this recording, you are completely and permanently disinherited. My mother screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure devastation. She fell hard onto her knees, clutching her head, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her bankruptcy crashed down on her. Every single asset, every property, and the entirety of my $15 million estate has been liquidated and moved securely into a blind trust, Big Mama stated, her voice sealing their fate with the strike of a gavel. You will not receive a single dime. You will not inherit the house. You will not get the cars. You are cut off. The massive LED screens flickered slightly as Big Mama leaned back in her chair, a look of profound peace settling over her tired features. She had delivered her justice from beyond the grave, ensuring her legacy would never be tainted by their greed. And as for the sole controller of that trust, Big Mama said, a knowing gleam returning to her eyes. Before my mother could even respond to Preston's manic demand, Mr. Sterling calmly stepped up to the DJ booth. He did not say a single word to my frantic father or the sweating groom. He simply pulled a sleek silver flash drive from his jacket pocket, plugged it directly into the laptop, and pressed play. The massive LED screens suspended above the dance floor flickered. The looping gold monogram of Chloe and Preston's initials vanished into a deep, heavy darkness. Suddenly, a pristine white light snapped onto the screens. It was Big Mama Ruby, sitting tall in her emerald velvet armchair, staring down at the room. Her deep, resonant voice boomed through the surround sound system, drowning out Preston's heavy breathing. And as for the entirety of my $15 million estate, Big Mama declared, her dark eyes piercing through the digital lens, it has been placed into a blind trust. I leave complete and absolute control of that trust to the only person in this family with an ounce of integrity. The sole controller and trustee is my granddaughter, Nia. The screens faded to black, leaving a cool, chilling blue afterglow that washed over the reception hall. A slow, sweeping pan of the camera captured the frozen, horrified faces of my parents. They stood completely paralyzed, their mouths slightly parted in absolute shock, as the reality of Big Mama's words crushed their fragile, wealthy facade. The sweeping pan continued, moving past the stunned guests and the ruined dessert table until it finally rested on me. I was standing perfectly calm near the center of the room, my arms crossed comfortably over my chest, bathed entirely in the cool blue light of the digital screens. The collective gasp from the 300 guests was so sharp it sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the room. My mother, her expensive silk gown soaked in cake batter and fondant, completely snapped. She dropped hard onto her knees, letting out a guttural, terrifying screech that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "It is illegal," Valerie shrieked, her voice tearing through the stunned silence. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her eyes wild with desperate fury. "You manipulated her. You crawled into her house while we were busy running the church, and you brainwashed a sick, defenseless old woman. You forced her to sign those papers because you knew you could never earn a dime on your own." I am contesting this in court. I am calling the police. Mr. Sterling did not even raise his voice. He smoothly unclasped his sleek black leather briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of legal and medical documents. There will be no contest, Valerie Sterling stated with freezing corporate precision. He gave a sharp nod to one of his security guards who immediately began walking down the front row, handing out pristine copies of the documents directly to the church elders and board members. Attached to the deed of trust are 5 independent psychiatric evaluations conducted by the top neurologists at Emory University Hospital over the course of 6 months. Ruby Thomas was tested, retested, and certified to be in perfect cognitive health until the very day she took her final breath. She was completely lucid, entirely aware of her actions, and legally bulletproof. I uncrossed my arms and took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parted further, treating me like royalty. And just for the record, Mother, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her panicked sobs, I did not manipulate anyone. I did not even know this blind trust existed until Mr. Sterling showed up at my corporate office yesterday morning. Big Mama set this entire thing up in absolute secrecy. She knew that if you or Dad found out she was protecting me, you would have made her final months a living hell. She built a financial fortress around me that your toxic entitlement could never penetrate. My father looked like a man who had just been struck by a freight train. His broad, authoritative shoulders caved inward. He opened his mouth to deliver one of his famous booming sermons to try and regain control of his flock, but no sound came out. I turned my gaze entirely onto him, letting the full weight of my success press down on his fragile ego. Do you remember Christmas 5 years ago, Jamal? I asked, dropping the title of Dad completely. Do you remember standing in the church rectory in front of the entire deacon board and telling me I was a foolish, rebellious child? You said my business ideas were a joke. You looked me dead in the eye and said I would end up working at a drive-thru begging you for loose change because I refused to marry a wealthy man and play the submissive little church wife like Chloe. My father swallowed hard, a heavy bead of sweat tracing down his temple. The deacons in the front row, who were currently reading Big Mama's psychiatric evaluations, were now staring at him with absolute disgust. Well, I am not working at a drive-thru. I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable power. I own Crown Estates. I own this luxury resort. And as of yesterday, when I assumed control of Big Mama's trust, I discovered a very interesting piece of real estate in her portfolio. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. 2 years ago, when the church expansion went massively over budget, and you quietly defaulted on the commercial loan to save face the bank, prepared to seize the property. Big Mama bought the deed. She paid it off in full in cash through an anonymous holding company. She did not save it for you, Jamal. She saved it to put it into the trust. I leaned in, locking eyes with the man who had belittled me my entire life. I literally own the land your church is built on. I am your landlord, and your lease is officially under review. The total devastation on my father's face was a masterpiece. He staggered backward, clutching his chest as if the air had been violently knocked out of his lungs. Chloe was weeping uncontrollably into the ruined tulle of her wedding dress, rocking back and forth on the floor. But Preston was not looking at Chloe. He was not looking at my parents. He was staring at me, his face devoid of all color, his eyes wide with the realization of his own impending doom. There was no trust fund payout. There was no bailout. The $4 million he owed to a syndicate of dangerous, unregulated lenders was due today, and his golden ticket had just been incinerated. Preston slowly backed away from the altar, his eyes darting frantically toward the side exit doors leading out to the valet parking lot. He turned and broke into a full sprint, abandoning his pregnant bride in a puddle of cake batter. He shoved past 2 bewildered waiters and slammed his hands against the heavy oak doors, bursting out into the cool night air. But he did not make it past the threshold. Standing shoulder to shoulder in the corridor, blocking every single exit from the venue, was a group of massive, unsmiling men. They wore dark tactical windbreakers, and mirrored sunglasses standing perfectly still with their hands resting casually over their holsters. The heavy oak doors swung inward with bone-rattling force, hitting the walls with a violent crack. A fast tracking shot follows the team of federal agents as they march straight into the reception hall, their heavy boots moving in perfect synchronization. The sea of pristine white floral arrangements and towering centerpieces parts violently as men and women wearing dark windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and SEC across the back swarm the room. They do not care about the ruined cake or the crying bride. Their eyes are locked entirely on their target. Preston scrambles backward, his polished leather shoes slipping on the marble floor smeared with fondant and buttercream. He lets out a high-pitched sound of pure terror, knocking over a towering pyramid of champagne glasses. A cascade of shattered crystal and expensive liquor washes across the dance floor as he blindly retreats. He stumbles through the terrified crowd until his back slams hard against the edge of the extravagant seafood buffet table. He is completely trapped. Preston Vance. You are under arrest for securities fraud and wire fraud. A lead FBI agent barks, grabbing Preston roughly by the shoulder. The agent spins him around, slamming him face first into the buffet table. Trays of smoked salmon and expensive cocktail sauce clatter to the floor, splattering across his ruined, once pristine tuxedo. Preston thrashes wildly against the agent's unyielding grip, twisting his neck to glare at me with eyes bulging out of his head. "You vicious witch," he screams, his voice cracking with absolute panic as the cold steel of the handcuffs snaps tightly around his wrists. "You called the cops on me! You set me up!" I step forward, bathing in the cool blue light still radiating from the massive digital screens above. I fold my arms across my chest, watching him squirm with total emotional detachment. "I am a real estate developer, Preston." I say, my voice perfectly level and echoing across the silent hall. "I do not have the jurisdiction to arrest anyone. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been tracking your fraudulent offshore accounts for 8 months. You left a digital paper trail a mile long. I did not need to call the police to prove you were a criminal." I take a slow, deliberate step closer, lowering my voice just enough so he has to strain to hear it over his own frantic, heavy breathing. "But I did make one anonymous phone call this morning. I tipped off the federal prosecutor that you were a severe flight risk. I let them know you had a one-way first-class ticket to the Cayman Islands booked for midnight tonight, and that you were planning to use my family's trust fund money to finance your permanent disappearance." The realization that he is utterly defeated finally snaps whatever thin thread of sanity Preston has left. The charming, progressive, socially conscious persona he had meticulously worn for the last 2 years evaporates in an instant. The polite, respectful son-in-law mask is ripped away, revealing the absolute monster underneath. As the federal agents yank him off the buffet table and begin dragging him backward across the dance floor, he turns his absolute fury onto my parents. "You pathetic, gullible fools!" Preston screams, fighting against the agents and kicking wildly at the debris on the floor. He locks eyes with my father and unleashes a torrent of vile, unfiltered racial slurs that shock the entire congregation. He calls them desperate, classless, and inherently stupid, openly mocking their desperate, pathetic need for white validation. "You practically threw your pregnant daughter at me. You were so desperate to have a wealthy white venture capitalist in your country club photos that you did not even bother to run a basic background check. You let me walk right into your bank accounts because you are socially insecure cowards. You are a joke, Jamal. A pathetic social climbing joke." My mother stumbles backward, covering her mouth with trembling hands as a fresh wave of horrified tears streams down her face. She looks at Preston as if staring at a demon, her entire worldview collapsing around her. My father looks physically ill, his chest heaving, his mouth opening and closing without a single word forming. The man they had placed on an untouchable pedestal, the man they had deemed inherently superior to their own flesh and blood, is spitting pure racist poison at them in front of 300 stunned guests. The golden idol they worshipped had just slapped them directly in the face. The agents march Preston out of the hall, his manic screaming fading as the heavy doors swing shut behind him. The reception room is left in a state of suffocating, vibrating shock. The silence is so absolute it feels heavy enough to crush bone. Deacon Jamal finally tries to straighten his posture. He smooths down his silk lapels, attempting to salvage some microscopic shred of his pastoral authority to lead his flock through the humiliation. But the nightmare is not over. The lead FBI agent does not follow his team out the door. Instead, he turns around. He walks with deliberate, heavy steps across the ruined dance floor, moving directly toward my father. "Deacon Jamal Adams," the agent asks, his voice cutting through the stillness like a razor blade. He reaches into the inner pocket of his dark windbreaker and pulls out a folded legal document. "Yes," my father stammers, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his brow. "I am the head of this family and the pastor of this church. I assure you, officer, we had absolutely no idea about this man's criminal activities. We are victims of his deception as well." "Sir, I am not here to ask for your assurances," the agent says, stepping firmly into my father's personal space. He unfolds the crisp document and holds it up so the church elders in the front row can clearly read the official federal seal. "I have a federal search warrant for your church's financial records and all associated ecclesiastical bank accounts. We intercepted a very interesting transaction during our surveillance yesterday afternoon." My father freezes, the remaining color draining from his face until he is ghostly pale. The agent pauses, letting his cold, calculating gaze sweep over my father, my mother, and the terrified board members sitting nearby. Preston Vance's fraudulent shell company received a direct wire transfer of $250,000. Yesterday, the agent announces, ensuring every single person in the room hears the catastrophic truth. And that transfer came directly from your congregation's building fund. The heavy silence that followed the federal agent's declaration was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic sweeping flash of red and blue police lights pulsing through the tall arched windows of the reception hall. The harsh strobes cast jagged, elongated shadows across my father's face. From where I stood watching him stagger backward, he no longer looked like the booming, invincible patriarch of our family. Stripped of his pulpit and his perceived moral authority, he looked incredibly small. He was a pathetic, hollow shell of a man, shrinking under the crushing weight of his own manufactured hubris. The congregation members, who made up fully half of the 300 guests in the room, did not stay silent for long. A collective murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, rapidly escalating into a tidal wave of outrage. Deacon Miller, a 70-year-old man who had served on the church financial board for 2 decades, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His hands were trembling, his face tight with a furious, heartbreaking betrayal. Jamal Deacon Miller demanded, his voice cracking with emotion as he stared at my father. "Tell me this agent is lying. Tell me you did not touch the building fund. We raised that money dollar by dollar. Sister Beatrice gave portions of her Social Security check to that fund. Families skipped meals to contribute to that account. Please tell me before God that you did not steal from your own flock." My father opened his mouth, but his usually commanding voice failed him. He looked desperately around the room, seeking a friendly face, an ounce of sympathy, or a way to spin the catastrophe. There was nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust staring back at him. Valerie, my mother, grabbed his arm, her acrylic nails digging into his tuxedo sleeve. "Jamal," she hissed, her voice frantic and breathless. "What is he talking about? What did you do?" My father physically crumbled. His knees buckled slightly, and he leaned heavily against a cocktail table to keep from collapsing onto the marble floor. "It was an investment," he stammered, the words spilling out of him in a desperate, pathetic rush. He held up his shaking hands, trying to placate the furious crowd of elders pressing in around him. "You have to understand, I was doing it for the church. I was doing it for all of us." Preston showed me the portfolios. He showed me the projections for his venture capital fund. He promised me a 300% return by the end of the fiscal quarter. "You gave him the church's money!" Deacon Miller roared, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "You took $250,000 of sacred funds and handed it to a con artist. It was a bridge loan," my father cried out, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. He looked at my mother, then at the furious congregation, begging them to understand his twisted logic. Preston comes from an entirely different world. He has access to institutional wealth we could never dream of touching. He told me he needed a temporary liquidity injection to finalize a massive corporate merger. I gave it to him as a secret dowry, a gesture of good faith to secure his firm's financial backing for our new sanctuary. I thought I was securing our family's legacy. I thought I was elevating this entire community. I thought he would triple the money. The sheer absurdity of his confession hung in the air, a toxic cloud of internalized racism and desperate social climbing. He had willingly handed over the life savings of hundreds of hardworking black families to a privileged white scammer because he fundamentally believed Preston's proximity to whiteness equated to guaranteed success. He trusted a criminal in a bespoke suit unconditionally, simply because of his pedigree, while he had relentlessly punished and doubted his own daughter. I stepped forward, my heels crunching over the shattered crystal and smeared wedding cake. The crowd immediately parted for me. I walked straight up to my father, stopping mere inches from his face. I did not yell. I did not need to raise my voice to let him feel the absolute finality of his destruction. You preached about integrity every Sunday, but you sold out your own people to buy a seat at a table that didn't even exist, I said, my voice echoing with icy clarity across the silent hall. You stood in that pulpit week after week, demanding tithes from single mothers and working-class families, demanding they trust you as a man of God. And the second you thought you could buy your way into elite society, you handed their sacrifices over to a parasite. You did not do this to elevate the church, Jamal. You did it because you wanted to brag at the country club that your son-in-law was a Wall Street titan. You sold your soul for a lie. My father squeezed his eyes shut, fat tears rolling down his cheeks as the reality of his total ruin set in. My mother had collapsed completely into a nearby chair, weeping hysterically as the women of the church she had belittled for years looked down on her with sheer pity. Chloe remained frozen on the floor, clutching her stomach, entirely abandoned by the man she thought was her golden ticket. The lead FBI agent, utterly unmoved by my father's religious excuses and pathetic tears, stepped firmly back into the center of the confrontation. He snapped his notebook shut with a sharp, decisive crack. Reverend Adams, the agent stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy, I do not care about your social aspirations, your bridge loans, or your family's desperate need for prestige. That building fund was held in a federally insured bank account, and you authorized a fraudulent wire transfer across state lines to a documented criminal enterprise. The agent leaned in close, his badge catching the blue light of the screens above. You have exactly until Monday morning at 8 o'clock to return every single cent of that $250,000. The agent delivered the final crushing blow. If that church account is not made entirely whole by the time the banks open, I will personally return to this property with a pair of handcuffs. You will be sitting in a federal holding cell right next to your new son-in-law, facing 40 years for felony embezzlement. The words hung in the stale, humid air of the reception hall like a death sentence. For a fraction of a second, the entire venue was trapped in a vacuum of absolute silence, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic flashes of red and blue police lights spilling through the towering arched windows. Then the collective gasp from the church elders tore through the room. Whispers erupted into outright shouts of outrage. Men who had trusted my father with their life savings began surging forward, their faces twisted in a heartbreaking mixture of betrayal and blinding rage. The camera cuts to a tight, unforgiving close-up on Valerie's face. Thick streaks of waterproof mascara and expensive liquid foundation are melting together, carving dark, muddy rivers down her trembling cheeks. Her flawless, untouchable First Lady persona is disintegrating in real time. The focus pulls back, racking sharply to me. I am standing just a few feet away, my posture perfectly straight, my expression carved from solid ice, looking entirely unfazed by the spectacular fiery implosion of her carefully curated universe. The lead FBI agent does not offer another word of comfort. He simply turns on his heel and marches out of the double doors, leaving my father to face the wrath of the congregation he robbed. Deacon Jamal Adams, the man who demanded absolute submission from everyone around him, physically crumbles. He drops to his knees amidst the shattered crystal and smeared wedding cake, burying his face in his hands as the elders begin demanding their money back. With her husband facing federal prison, her favorite daughter's groom arrested, and her lifelong reputation reduced to ashes in a matter of minutes, Valerie finally snaps. The survival instinct of a cornered animal takes over. She realizes that the only lifeline left in this room, the only source of actual wealth and power remaining, is the daughter she threw away like garbage. Valerie falls to her hands and knees. She does not care about the hundreds of judgmental eyes burning into her back. She does not care about the sticky, ruined fondant staining the skirt of her custom-tailored silk gown. She physically crawls across the marble floor, dragging herself through the wreckage of Chloe's $4 million wedding until she reaches my feet. She reaches out with trembling, desperate hands and tightly grabs the hem of my dress. "Nia, please!" Valerie shrieks, her voice raw and jagged, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She tilts her head back, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "You have the trust fund. Big Mama left you $15 million. $250,000 is nothing to you now. It is pocket change. You have to write a check. You have to replace the building fund before Monday morning. They are going to put your father in a federal penitentiary." I do not step back. I do not flinch. I stand perfectly still, letting her grovel in the dirt at my feet while the entire congregation watches in stunned, breathless silence. The mighty, judgmental matriarch of our family is publicly begging the outcast daughter she claimed was useless. "We are blood." Nia, Valerie wails, her fingers digging desperately into the fabric of my dress. "You cannot let your own father go to jail. We are your family. You have to save us." Blood. I repeat the word slowly, letting it roll off my tongue as if it leaves a foul metallic taste in my mouth. I look down into her terrified face, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "Do you remember my sophomore year of college, Valerie?" I ask, projecting my voice clearly, so that every single guest, every elder, and every remaining security guard can hear my words. I was lying in a sterile hospital bed at County General. My appendix had ruptured. I was fighting off a massive septic infection, screaming in absolute agony and running a fever of 104. The surgical team told you I might not make it through the night. I called you from the emergency ward, crying, begging you to come hold my hand because I was terrified I was going to die alone. Valerie freezes her breath, hitching in her throat as the memory crashes into her. The crowd behind her goes dead silent, listening to the horrifying reality of the mother they had idolized. "Do you remember what you told me on that phone call?" I demand, my tone dropping to a lethal quiet register. "You told me you could not make the 30-minute drive. You said Chloe had a minor tension headache from studying for a quiz and she needed a mother's touch to help her sleep. You stayed home in your comfortable mansion to rub her temples while I faced emergency surgery, completely alone. You literally left me to die in a public hospital ward because your golden child had a slight migraine." I leaned down slightly, locking my eyes entirely onto hers. "So please, Valerie, tell me again about the undeniable sacred bond of our blood. Where was my blood then?" Valerie lets out a strangled, agonizing sob. She covers her face, weeping hysterically into the folds of my dress. "I was wrong," she cries out, her voice muffled by her tears. "I was so blind, Nia. I am so sorry. We will make it up to you. We will do whatever you want. We will change. Just save your father. Save our family from this humiliation." I stand up straight, looking out over the ruined reception hall. Chloe is still sobbing on the floor. My father is completely paralyzed by his impending federal charges. The fake empire they built on hypocrisy and theft has been utterly leveled. I slowly reach into my sleek designer clutch. The crisp sound of the leather zipper cuts sharply through Valerie's frantic, ragged sobbing. I pull out my platinum business checkbook and a heavy, gold monogrammed pen. I uncap the pen with a sharp, echoing metallic click. The entire room holds its collective breath, watching to see if the outcast daughter will actually grant them mercy. I look down at my mother, holding the blank check directly over her tear-stained face. "I will write the $250,000 check right now." I state, my voice carrying the absolute, unyielding authority of a woman who holds all the cards, but on one condition. The camera shifts to a tight over-the-shoulder shot from my perspective, looking straight down at the ruined matriarch of our family. From this angle, Valerie looks incredibly small, stripped of her towering heels and her suffocating arrogance. She is kneeling in a puddle of spilled champagne and crushed icing, staring up at the blank check in my hand as if it is a glowing life preserver in the middle of a freezing ocean. She does not hesitate. She does not try to negotiate or ask what the condition is. Her pride has been entirely obliterated by the flashing police lights outside the venue windows. Yes, Valerie gasps, nodding her head so frantically that a loose strand of her heavily sprayed hair falls across her tear-streaked face. Anything. I will do whatever you want, Nia. Just write the check. Please give it to the agent before they take your father away. We will agree to absolutely anything you ask. I slowly lower my hand, keeping the checkbook securely in my grasp. I shift my gaze away from my mother, letting my eyes lock onto my father. Deacon Jamal is still leaning heavily against the cocktail table, looking like a man marching toward the gallows. He refuses to meet my eyes, staring instead at the marble floor, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his public disgrace. My condition comes in two parts, I say, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity in the dead silent reception hall. First, your career as a supposed moral authority in this community is over. You will step down as the head deacon of the church immediately. And tomorrow morning at the 9 o'clock Sunday service, you will stand at the pulpit in front of the entire congregation. You will look into the eyes of the people you stole from, and you will publicly confess exactly what you did. You will tell them that you embezzled their hard-earned building fund to pay a secret dowry to a white venture capitalist because you were desperate to buy your way into elite society. My father lets out a choked, agonizing sound. He finally looks up at me, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Nia, please," he whispers, his voice cracking. "If I do that, I will be ruined. I will never be able to show my face in this city again. My reputation will be permanently destroyed." "Your reputation was built on a foundation of lies and stolen money," I remind him, my tone completely devoid of pity. "You destroyed it yourself the second you wired those funds. You can either confess to your congregation tomorrow morning, or you can confess to a federal judge on Monday while wearing an orange jumpsuit. The choice is entirely yours." Jamal swallows hard, his broad shoulders sagging as the last remaining fight drains out of his body. He gives a slow, defeated nod. "Good." I continue stepping closer to him, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. "But that is only the first part. The second part involves your primary residence. The sprawling 6-bedroom mansion in the gated community that you love to show off to your church friends." Valerie gasps, her hands flying to her mouth. She tries to scramble to her feet, but her heavy ruined dress pins her to the floor. "What about the house?" she asks, panic edging her voice higher. "You are signing the deed over to me tonight," I state coldly. "I am taking complete ownership of the property and you are forfeiting all of your equity. You will pack your belongings and vacate the premises by Wednesday. You are officially evicted. You cannot do that." Valerie shrieks, her desperation returning. "That is our home. We paid the mortgage on that house for years. You cannot just steal it from us." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoes through the room. "I am not stealing anything, Valerie. I am claiming what is legally mine. Have you conveniently forgotten how you got that house in the first place? 5 years ago, when your credit was absolutely trashed from living far beyond your means, and the bank was threatening to deny your mortgage application, you begged me to co-sign. I put my name and my flawless credit on the line so you could secure that massive loan. I have legal claim to that property, and now I am executing it." I lean down, bringing my face inches from my mother's terrified, tear-stained expression. "You demanded my penthouse keys an hour ago to house a scammer." I whisper, the venom in my voice razor sharp. "You thought you could just snap your fingers and take everything I built to give to Preston. Now I am taking your keys. You beat me, humiliated me, and wanted me completely homeless at 18 because I would not be a prop in your fake society show. Now let us see exactly how well you survive starting over at 55 with nothing but the clothes on your back." Valerie lets out a raw, devastating wail, collapsing forward until her forehead touches the cold marble floor. She has lost everything. her money, her status, her home, and her golden child's future. Mr. Sterling steps forward seamlessly. He does not ask for permission. He simply reaches over to an abandoned catering tray, picks up a thick, pristine white linen napkin, and withdraws a heavy fountain pen from his breast pocket. Using the edge of the buffet table, he swiftly writes out a legally binding confession of embezzlement and a transfer of property rights. He turns and holds the pen out to my father. "Sign it, Jamal." Mr. Sterling commands, his voice carrying the terrifying weight of a corporate executioner. My father's hand shakes violently as he takes the pen. He stares at the linen napkin, knowing that putting his name on that fabric seals his complete and total ruin. But he looks at the federal agents waiting by the double doors, and he knows he has absolutely no other way out. With a stifled sob, he presses the pen to the cloth and scribbles his signature. I watch him sign his life away, feeling a profound, chilling sense of closure. I place my checkbook against the palm of my hand and write out the check for $250,000. I tear it from the binding with a crisp, satisfying rip. I do not hand it to my father. I do not hand it to the federal agent. I drop it. The small slip of paper flutters through the air, landing softly on the marble floor right next to my mother's trembling hands. "Consider the debt paid," I say, turning my back on them. The crowd parts as I begin to walk toward the exit, my head held high, my victory absolute. But as I take my third step away from the wreckage of my family, a sudden frantic movement catches my eye in the peripheral reflection of the mirrored pillars. Chloe, who had been sitting in the cake batter sobbing hysterically, suddenly stops crying. Her eyes go completely dead, hollowed out by the sheer trauma of losing her billionaire fantasy and her entire safety net in a single night. She slowly climbs to her feet, her ruined wedding dress hanging heavily off her frame. She turns toward a nearby dining table. Her hand shoots out, grabbing the thick, serrated handle of a heavy silver steak knife. The heavy silver handle of the blade gleams sharply under the erratic pulse of the police lights. Chloe lets out a guttural, feral screech that tears completely through the ambient shock of the room. It is a sound entirely devoid of her usual polished country club vocal fry. It is the raw, violent sound of a cornered animal realizing its gilded cage has just been permanently locked. She lunges. The sequence of events unfolds with a chaotic, dizzying speed. The world blurs in a sudden, violent whip of motion. Her ruined, frosting-smeared wedding gown tangles around her legs, but sheer, unadulterated adrenaline propels her forward. She raises the serrated steak knife high above her head, the blade catching the flashing blue lights outside her eyes, blown wide with an unhinged, murderous desperation. "You ruined my life!" she shrieks, her voice cracking as she charges blindly across the marble floor. "You ruined everything!" The attack is clumsy, fueled by blind, pathetic panic, rather than any actual physical capability. Time seems to slow down to a crawl. I do not panic, I do not scream, I simply pivot on my heels, shifting my weight to the side in a smooth, effortless motion. Chloe's own reckless momentum betrays her. She sails past me, slicing nothing but empty air, her heavy beaded gown dragging her violently off balance. Before she can even attempt to right herself, the chaotic blur of motion resolves into brutal clinical efficiency. Mr. Sterling's private security detail moves with terrifying speed. A massive guard in a tailored black suit steps directly into Chloe's path. He grips her wrist with one massive hand, twisting her arm backward with expert precision. Chloe lets out a sharp gasp of pain as her fingers involuntarily open. The silver steak knife clatters harmlessly against the marble, spinning away into the wreckage of a shattered floral centerpiece. In a fraction of a second, the guard forces her face down onto the cold floor, pinning her arms securely behind her back. Pure pandemonium erupts. The remaining wedding guests shriek in absolute horror, scrambling backward, knocking over gold Chiavari chairs and cocktail tables in a frantic bid to get away from the violence. Valerie screams my sister's name, a raw, piercing sound of pure maternal terror, but she is still too tangled in her own ruined dress to intervene. My father remains frozen against the buffet table, his hands still shaking from signing away his entire life, completely incapable of protecting his favorite child. I slowly walk over to where Chloe is pinned against the floor. Her flawless bridal makeup is completely destroyed, her face pressed against the sticky, champagne-soaked marble. She is hyperventilating, struggling weakly against the guard's immovable grip, her chest heaving as she glares up at me with toxic, venomous hatred. I look down at her, taking in the pathetic sight of the sister who spent her entire life making me feel invisible. I ruined absolutely nothing, I state, my voice dropping to a harsh, quiet whisper that cuts directly through the surrounding chaos. You ruined your own life, Chloe. You chased status instead of substance. You cared more about the designer label on your engagement ring than the actual character of the man putting it on your finger. She squeezes her eyes shut, sobbing violently as my words strike her. You willingly married a fraud because you are a fundamental fraud yourself. I continue, the cold reality of my words striking her like a physical blow. You spent years looking down on everyone who actually worked for a living, convinced your proximity to our parents' fake wealth made you untouchable. You chose to ignore every single red flag about Preston because you wanted the billionaire title so badly you were willing to sacrifice your own family to get it. This entire disaster is the direct result of your own manufactured vanity. You did this to yourself. The local police officers who had been coordinating Preston's transfer to the federal agents by the main entrance hear the commotion and immediately rush into the hall. They take one look at the discarded weapon, the pinned bride, and the terrified guests, huddled against the walls. The lead officer does not ask questions. He steps in, taking over from Sterling's security guard with a stern, unforgiving grip. He hauls Chloe up by her arms. Her pristine silk sleeves are stained with dirt and cake batter. She tries to thrash, kicking her white satin heels out, but the officers are completely unmoved by her hysterics. You have the right to remain silent. The officer barks loudly, his voice echoing over the ringing sirens outside. He snaps a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around Chloe's wrists, binding them tightly behind her back. The sharp metallic click seals her fate. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Valerie unleashes a blood-curdling scream, finally dragging herself up from the floor. She claws at the air, watching in sheer paralyzed horror as her pregnant golden child, the daughter she believed was destined for high society royalty, is forcefully shoved through the shattered reception doors and pushed roughly into the back of a waiting squad car, officially arrested for aggravated assault on her own wedding night. The flashing lights of the squad car bleed through the stained glass windows, casting a chaotic mix of red and blue across the ruined reception hall. The wail of the siren pierces the night air, growing fainter, as Chloe is hauled away to a holding cell, her bridal gown shoved into the back of a police cruiser. Valerie remains frozen on her knees, her hands covering her face as she lets out a hollow, ragged scream that tears through the heavy silence of the room. She has just watched her pregnant golden child arrested for aggravated assault, her husband detained for federal embezzlement, and her own home signed away on a catering napkin. Her perfect manicured world has been completely eradicated in less than an hour. I do not offer her a single backward glance. The time for misplaced family loyalty died years ago. Mr. Sterling, his bespoke suit immaculate, and his posture rigid, steps onto the raised platform where the live band abandoned their instruments. He picks up the microphone. A sharp, high-pitched feedback whine cuts through the murmurs of the 300 guests, demanding instant attention. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sterling announces, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings with cold corporate authority. By order of the property owner, this event has been officially terminated. You are trespassing on a private venue. Security will now escort you to the exits. We ask that you clear the premises immediately. The remaining guests, a collection of the city's most elite socialites, church elders, and country club gossips, erupt into a tidal wave of frantic whispering. Cell phones are raised high in the air, camera lenses focused directly on Valerie, kneeling in the spilled cake batter. The flashbulbs pop relentlessly, capturing the spectacular downfall of the First Lady of the congregation. The very people Valerie had spent decades trying to impress, the women she had belittled, and the men Jamal had manipulated, are now actively documenting her ultimate humiliation. Sterling's private security detail moves in a synchronized, imposing line, firmly ushering the gawking crowd toward the massive oak doors. As the guests are herded out, a new wave of chaos descends upon my mother. The vendors who had been watching the federal raid unfold from the kitchen doors realize the horrifying financial reality of the situation. The lead wedding planner, a woman Valerie had verbally abused for 6 straight months, marches across the floor with the head caterer and the chief florist right behind her. Mrs. Adams, the wedding planner, demands her voice sharp and utterly devoid of her usual customer service sweetness. The secondary checks you wrote for the imported orchids and the beluga caviar upgrades just bounced. My bank sent the notification 20 minutes ago. You owe my agency $50,000 for tonight, and the caterers are shorted another $30,000. We need alternate payment right now. Valerie looks up, her eyes wide with a fresh, paralyzing wave of panic. Her hands shake violently as she clutches the ruined silk of her mother-of-the-bride gown. I do not have it, she stammers, her voice breaking. My husband's accounts are frozen. The church fund is empty. We have nothing. The caterer crosses his arms, looking down at her with absolute disgust. You threw a $4 million wedding on credit and stolen money, he sneers. I am calling the police to report fraud the second I leave this building. Valerie shrinks backward entirely, bankrupt, humiliated, and utterly alone on the cold marble floor. Her husband cannot save her. Her golden daughter cannot save her. The wealthy society friends she coveted are currently posting videos of her downfall on the internet. I turn on my heel and walk away. A Steadicam motion captures my exit, tracking backwards smoothly as I glide across the grand foyer. My heels click rhythmically against the polished stone, a steady, deliberate heartbeat cutting through the shouting and the desperate pleas fading behind me. I do not rush. I do not look back at the wreckage. I let the heavy, soundproof oak doors swing shut, instantly silencing the chaos of the reception hall and leaving my mother to face the wolves she invited to the table. I walk down the long, gilded corridor, the air growing cooler and quieter with every step. I pause as I reach the grand entrance antechamber. I stand perfectly still on the exact spot where Valerie slapped me just hours earlier. I remember the sharp, burning sting of her palm against my cheek. I remember the way she looked down her nose at me, demanding my penthouse keys to house the very scammer who had just bankrupted her husband. The contrast is stark and profound. The abused, discarded daughter who walked through these doors at the beginning of the evening is gone. In her place stands a mogul who just dismantled a lifetime of generational trauma with a single checkbook and a fountain pen. They wanted me broken at 18, sleeping in a car because I refused to be a prop in their hollow social climbing. Now I own the very roof they sleep under, and they are left with the exact amount of mercy they once showed me, which is absolutely none. I push open the heavy glass exit doors and step out into the crisp, biting night air. The valet has already pulled my black Maybach to the curb. My driver, seeing my approach, immediately steps out and opens the rear passenger door. Thank you, Marcus, I say softly, slipping into the quiet, temperature-controlled interior of the luxury vehicle. The thick doors close, sealing me in a sanctuary of absolute silence. I lean back against the plush leather, closing my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the immense weight of the victory wash over me. It is over. Then the silence is shattered. My phone vibrates violently in the cup holder. The harsh buzzing sound fills the quiet cabin. I pick up the device, the screen illuminating the dark interior of the car. The caller ID displays a restricted number. I know immediately who it is. I swipe the screen to answer and bring the phone slowly to my ear. Nia, a voice breathes through the receiver. It is Preston. The background noise is unmistakable. The hollow, echoing clang of cinder block walls, the heavy slam of metal gates, and the chaotic murmur of an intake facility. He is calling from a federal holding cell, his smooth, arrogant billionaire persona completely stripped away, replaced by the trembling, desperate voice of a cornered fraud. Nia, please tell me you are still there. Preston begs, his breath hitching as a loud, aggressive shout echoes from the holding cell behind him. You have to listen to me. This is all a massive misunderstanding. I lean back deeply into the soft, heated leather of the Maybach. In the dark, luxurious back seat, the neon lights of the downtown financial district roll across my face in vibrant, rhythmic flashes of crimson and gold, illuminating my completely impassive expression. The absolute soundproofing of the vehicle isolates us entirely, trapping his frantic, sweaty panic within the pristine quiet of my car. "I am here, Preston," I reply, my voice perfectly level, devoid of a single ounce of empathy. "It is a clerical error," he rambles, his words spilling over each other in a desperate frenzy. "My compliance department filed the wrong disclosures regarding the bridge loan from your father. The SEC is blowing this entirely out of proportion. You know how these federal agents are. They want to make a public example out of a successful venture capitalist. Nia, you have the liquidity. You have the trust fund. I need you to wire my bail money the second the judge sets the amount tomorrow morning. If I am forced to stay in this county jail over the weekend, the media will completely destroy my firm's stock price before the markets even open on Monday." I remain perfectly silent, listening to the rhythmic hum of the car tires against the asphalt. He is still lying. Even now, wearing a paper-thin jail uniform and surrounded by actual criminals, he cannot stop attempting to spin his web of arrogant deceit. When I do not immediately respond, Preston shifts his tactics, pivoting instantly from corporate entitlement to emotional warfare. "Nia, think about your sister," he pleads, lowering his voice to a hushed, frantic whisper. "Think about Chloe. She is pregnant. She is carrying your niece or nephew. She is fragile and terrified right now. If she loses this baby from the sheer stress of seeing her husband locked up in a federal penitentiary, that blood will be on your hands. You cannot punish an innocent child just because you are holding a grudge against me. We are family now. You have to protect us." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his manipulation hangs in the quiet cabin of the car. He is actively using the unborn child of the sister who just tried to stab me as leverage to gain access to my bank accounts. "Are you finished?" I ask, my tone dropping to a lethal icy register. "Nia, please, I am begging you," he stammers. "We are absolutely nothing, Preston," I state, cutting him off with the precision of a scalpel. "And you are not in a holding cell because of a clerical error. You are in a holding cell because I put you there." The line goes dead silent. The only sound is the ragged, shallow pulling of his breath through the receiver. "Did you really believe the federal raid on your wedding night was a random coincidence?" I ask, letting the devastating reality of my words sink into his terrified mind. "The SEC has been investigating your firm for 6 months, but they lacked the internal documentation to secure a hard warrant. They could not prove that your offshore accounts were dummy corporations designed to launder money. So I provided the proof for them. I forwarded every single piece of fake financial documentation you gave my father directly to the lead prosecutor. I handed them the routing numbers, the forged wire transfers, and the exact timestamps of your embezzlement." Preston chokes out the realization, paralyzing him. "I also forwarded every single threatening text message you sent me. I continue, entirely unrelenting. I gave them the voicemails where you attempted to extort me for my penthouse. I supplied the federal agents with a complete, undeniable paper trail of your entire fraudulent existence. And then I personally pulled the strings with my corporate attorneys to ensure your arrest warrant was executed tonight, right in the middle of your $4 million reception. I wanted you to lose everything in front of the exact high society crowd you were trying to impress." "You are a monster," he hisses, his voice shaking with a potent mixture of raw fear and absolute hatred. "I will destroy you for this. When my lawyers get me out of here, I will take every single thing you own. You thought because I was a black woman from a religious family, I would stay quiet and bow to your white-collar intimidation," I say coldly, my eyes locked on the glowing city skyline passing by the window. "You thought I was just an obedient, silent prop you could bully out of a penthouse. You looked at me and saw an easy target. But you picked the wrong family to scam and the wrong sister to mess with. You are looking at 40 years in federal prison, Preston. Enjoy the catering." I do not wait for his response. I pull the phone away from my ear, press the red icon to end the call, and immediately block his restricted number. The cabin of the Maybach returns to a perfect, undisturbed silence. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the final heavy chains of my family's toxic expectations break away completely. The war is over. I have won. I reached toward the center console to place my phone down, ready to ask Marcus to drive me back to the absolute quiet of my penthouse. But before the device leaves my hand, the screen suddenly illuminates with a harsh, glaring notification. A priority alert chimes loudly through the car speakers. I glance down at the screen. It is an urgent automated message from the Private Wealth Management Division of my bank. I tap the notification, my brow furrowing in confusion. The email opens, displaying a bright red security warning. My heart stops dead in my chest. Someone is actively bypassing the two-factor authentication protocols. Someone is currently attempting a massive unauthorized wire transfer, trying to completely drain Big Mama's original untraceable offshore savings account. The harsh red glow of the bank's security warning reflects in the tinted windows of the Maybach, casting a sinister light across my face. Quick cuts dictate the rhythm of the moment. My eyes dart over the transaction details flashing across the glass, analyzing the data with cold mechanical precision. The screen displays a loading bar indicating a pending authorization. $50,000 is queued for an immediate outbound wire. It is the exact remaining balance of Big Mama's original personal checking account, the single solitary asset I had not yet folded into the impenetrable fortress of my corporate blind trust. It was a minor administrative oversight, a leftover account kept active solely for auto-paying a few of my grandmother's old charity pledges. Now someone is actively exploiting that tiny vulnerability. The destination account is heavily masked behind a proxy server, but the authorization codes being rapidly entered are undeniable. The infiltrator is bypassing the security questions using an old legacy family master list. They are manually inputting Big Mama's maiden name, her birth year, and the exact street address of her first childhood home in rural Georgia. Only blood relatives possess that highly specific combination of historical data. Preston is sitting in a holding cell, Jamal is financially paralyzed, and Valerie is currently crying on the floor of a ruined wedding reception. Neither Chloe nor Preston have the technical capability to run a proxy server from the back of a police cruiser. I tap the intercom button, connecting me to the front seat. Marcus, I say, my voice ringing out with razor-sharp clarity. Wrote my console directly to Mr. Sterling's overnight cybersecurity division. I need a hard IP trace on an active transaction right this second. Within a matter of seconds, a secure line clicks open. The lead analyst on Sterling's emergency team is already mirroring my device. I watch the rapid-fire sequence of tracking codes bleed down my display in lines of bright green text. The camera cuts back and forth in rapid succession. A tight shot on the sterile flashing data on the glass. A tight shot on the cold, unblinking focus in my eyes. The tension in the quiet cabin of the vehicle is absolute. We have a geographical location. Ms. Adams, the analyst, states, his voice a steady mechanical drone through the car's surround sound speakers. The IP address is bouncing off a local cellular tower directly adjacent to your current location. The device registry is completely unmasked. It is an iPhone registered to a Vivian Hayes. Aunt Vivian. The revelation strikes me not with shock, but with a profound, sickening sense of clarity. Aunt Vivian had sat in the shadowed corner of the reception hall all night long, sipping vintage champagne and watching the federal raid unfold with wide, seemingly innocent eyes. She played the horrified, helpless bystander to absolute perfection. She did not scream. She did not intervene. She simply melted into the background while her sister's entire life was dismantled. But the rot in this family does not just run wide. It runs incredibly toxically deep. It stretches straight up into the older generation. Aunt Vivian was the one who originally brought Preston into our orbit. She was the one who introduced him to my father at an exclusive country club mixer, aggressively vouching for his supposed billionaire status. She did it because she wanted a lucrative finder's fee for any church funds Jamal funneled his way. For decades, Aunt Vivian had been the silent, insidious architect of Valerie's worst behavior. She constantly fed my mother's insatiable vanity, whispering poison in her ear while quietly skimming the cream off the top of every family success. She watched her own sister get utterly destroyed tonight. And instead of offering a single shred of comfort, she immediately slipped out to the parking lot to loot the last available crumbs of my grandmother's legacy. The analyst's voice interrupts my realization, breaking through the heavy silence of the car. The transfer is pending final approval, Ms. Adams. Do you want me to freeze the asset and lock the user out of the banking portal completely? My finger hovers directly over the glowing red cancel button on my screen. I think about Aunt Vivian pretending to comfort Chloe over the years while secretly mocking her intelligence. I think about Vivian whispering loudly at family dinners that my graphic design business was a cute little hobby, while simultaneously demanding free branding packages for her failed suburban boutiques. I look at the $50,000 sitting vulnerable on the digital ledger waiting to be stolen. No, I command, slowly lowering my hand away from the screen. Do not freeze the account. Reroute the destination pathway. There is a brief pause on the line before the analyst responds. Reroute, ma'am. Mr. Sterling set up a series of highly secure decoy offshore accounts last quarter, I explain, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal cadence. He built them specifically to catch corporate espionage and track financial rats. I want you to slip one of those honeypot routing numbers directly over her intended destination. Let her think she is wiring the funds to her own hidden offshore account, but funnel every single cent straight into our federal trap. The analyst does not hesitate. The sound of rapid keystrokes clatters through the speaker. Rerouting the protocol now, he confirms. Pathway overwritten. The trap is completely invisible on her end. She will receive a standard confirmation receipt. I watch the screen with breathless, predatory anticipation. The progress bar stalls for a fraction of a second, waiting for Vivian's final confirmation. I can perfectly picture her standing in the chaotic, rain-slicked parking lot of the reception venue, huddled in her expensive mink coat, tapping the screen with her manicured nail. She fully believes she has just outsmarted everyone. She believes she has secured her own golden parachute while the rest of the family burns to the ground. The progress bar flashes bright green. The word approved stamps across the center of my screen in bold, undeniable text. Transfer complete. Aunt Vivian took the bait. She just unknowingly wired $50,000 of stolen assets directly into a heavily monitored, federally flagged corporate decoy account. By initiating that specific transfer across state and international lines using stolen digital credentials, she did not just commit a minor familial theft. She committed textbook undeniable federal wire fraud. She essentially handed the Department of Justice a neatly wrapped conviction with a bow on top. I lean back against the plush leather seat, a slow, dark smile finally breaking across my face. The glowing neon lights of the city blur past the window as I tap the intercom button one final time. Marcus, you can put the car in drive. We are going to make one more stop. The heavy tires of the Maybach roll forward, leaving the wreckage of my family's shattered dynasty behind in the rearview mirror. The night fades into a crisp, unforgiving dawn. The camera cuts to a wide, majestic shot of the Greater Hope megachurch the next morning. The morning sun catches the towering stained glass windows, casting brilliant geometric patterns across the sanctuary floor. The camera begins a slow, deliberate dolly in tracking straight down the center of the plush, velvet-lined main aisle. The sanctuary is packed to the absolute brim. There is not a single empty seat in the entire 4,000-capacity auditorium. Ushers are actively turning people away at the double doors, leaving hundreds more crowding the vestibule and spilling out onto the front steps. In Atlanta, high society gossip travels faster than a wildfire in a drought. Word of the spectacular, catastrophic implosion of Chloe and Preston's multi-million-dollar wedding had ripped through the city's black elite before midnight. Everyone in this building knows the federal agents raided the reception. Everyone knows the groom is currently sitting in a holding cell, and everyone is here to see exactly what the head of the church has to say about it. The air inside the sanctuary is thick with a buzzing electric anticipation. The usual joyful hum of Sunday morning fellowship has been replaced by furious whispered speculation. Church fans wave aggressively. Elaborate Sunday hats lean in toward one another as rumors are exchanged, analyzed, and dissected. I sit completely unbothered in the very back row, draped in shadows. I am wearing a flawless tailored white silk suit, the color of total innocence, the color of absolute victory. I watch with cold, detached precision as my father, Deacon Jamal, slowly ascends the steps to the pulpit. He looks like a walking corpse. The vibrant, booming, charismatic leader of the congregation has been entirely hollowed out. His broad shoulders are slumped forward, and his usually immaculate suit looks rumpled, hanging loosely off his frame, as if he aged a decade overnight. He grips the edges of the wooden podium with trembling hands. His knuckles are completely white. In front of him, resting on the polished wood, is the thick linen catering napkin containing the legally binding confession Mr. Sterling drafted last night. As he stares out over the sea of expectant faces, I lean back against the wooden pew. I know exactly how it feels to be the center of attention in this room for all the wrong reasons. For years, Jamal used this exact pulpit as a weapon against me. Whenever I rebelled against Valerie's oppressive society rules, whenever I refused to play the role of the silent, obedient prop, Jamal would stand at this very microphone and use me as his personal sermon material. He would preach about the dangers of a wayward child. He would loudly ask the congregation to pray for his rebellious, misguided daughter who had strayed from the path of righteousness. He humiliated me week after week, sacrificing my dignity to elevate his own image as a patient, long-suffering, pious patriarch. Now the tables have completely turned. He is the one standing under the glaring spotlight, and I am the one watching his public execution. My father clears his throat. The sound echoes through the massive speaker system, a dry, ragged rasp. The sprawling congregation falls dead silent. 4,000 pairs of eyes lock onto him. Brothers and sisters. Jamal begins, his voice shaking so violently the microphone picks up the vibration. I stand before you today, not as your leader, but as a broken man. I have committed a grievous sin against this church, against our community, and against God. A collective sharp intake of breath ripples through the first few rows. The choir members behind him shift uncomfortably in their robes. For the past 2 years, Jamal continues dropping his gaze to the linen napkin, unable to look his congregation in the eye. I have been entrusted with the oversight of the Community Building Fund. The money you raised through your tithes, your offerings, your bake sales, and your endless sacrifices. You trusted me to protect our future. I did not protect it. I stole it. A harsh, audible gasp echoes from the balconies. A few of the elder mothers in the front row cover their mouths in shock. I embezzled $1.2 million from the building fund, Jamal reads, his voice breaking into a pathetic, choked sob. I took the money you meant for the community center and the youth outreach programs. I wired every single cent of it to a white venture capitalist. I paid a secret dowry to a man named Preston Kensington. I did it because my wife and I were bankrupt and we were desperate to buy our daughter's way into a wealthy elite family. We wanted the status, we wanted the prestige, and I sacrificed this entire church to get it. The silence that follows his confession is terrifying. It is the absolute suffocating quiet of total betrayal. These are people who work 2 jobs to afford their tithes. These are seniors on fixed incomes who gave their last few dollars to support a building fund they believed would keep their grandchildren off the streets. Jamal did not just steal their money. He stole their hope, and he handed it to a white-collar scammer to fund a fake opulent lifestyle. The shock shatters, the sanctuary erupts. It starts with a single furious shout from the back of the room, followed instantly by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated outrage. The congregation rises to their feet. Deacons abandon their posts, shouting furiously toward the pulpit. Women are crying out in betrayal. The choir director throws his sheet music to the floor in disgust. The chaotic, deafening roar of 4,000 angry, heartbroken people bounces violently off the stained glass windows. Jamal shrinks backward, cowering behind the podium as the righteous fury of the community he robbed threatens to entirely swallow him alive. He looks small, pathetic, and utterly destroyed. Before the chaos can escalate into a full-scale riot, before the ushers can even attempt to restore a fraction of order to the sanctuary, I stand up. I smooth the lapels of my flawless white suit. I step out from the shadows of the back row. My heels strike the hardwood floor with a sharp, commanding crack that somehow cuts through the roaring crowd. I keep my head held high, my posture absolute and unyielding. The congregation members nearest to me notice the movement. They part instinctively, stepping back to clear a path. With slow, deliberate, and terrifying purpose, I begin my walk straight down the center of the main aisle. The Steadicam tracks my movement from behind as I glide down the center of the crimson carpet. The sheer volume of the sanctuary is deafening, a chaotic symphony of betrayal and rage. Men in tailored suits are shouting toward the pulpit. Women are sobbing, clutching their programs, devastated by the revelation that their spiritual leader is a common thief. Yet as I walk, a strange phenomenon occurs. The screaming congregants notice my steady, unbothered pace. They instinctively step back, pulling their families out of my way, parting like the Red Sea. My white silk suit catches the light from the massive stained glass windows, cutting a sharp, pristine line through the sea of turmoil. At the front of the sanctuary, the situation is devolving into absolute anarchy. Deacon Washington, a rigid, imposing man who has served on the board of elders for 3 decades, physically shoves Jamal aside. He snatches the microphone from my father's trembling hands. Jamal stumbles backward, collapsing into a high-backed velvet chair, burying his face in his hands. Deacon Washington's voice booms over the speakers, shaking with righteous fury. "You have ruined us," Jamal Washington roars, pointing a trembling finger at my father. "This church is completely bankrupt. We have creditors calling tomorrow morning. The bank is going to foreclose on this sanctuary by Friday. I am calling the authorities right now. You are going to jail." I reach the altar just as 3 other elders surround Jamal, physically blocking his exit. The congregation is whipped into a frenzy, demanding blood, demanding answers, demanding their money back. I do not run. I do not shout over the noise. I simply climb the 4 carpeted steps to the pulpit, walk directly up to Deacon Washington, and hold out my hand. He stops mid-shout, his eyes widening in confusion as he looks at me. I do not break eye contact. Slowly, almost magnetically, he relinquishes his grip on the microphone. I wrap my fingers around the cold metal of the microphone and turn to face the 4,000 people completely filling the auditorium. The noise begins to die down, rippling backward from the front pews to the upper balconies, until the entire megachurch falls into a tense, breathless silence. They are waiting for me to defend him. They are waiting for the loyal daughter to beg for mercy. "My father is a criminal," I state, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable clarity. "He stole your sacrifices to fund a pathetic, shallow illusion of wealth. He deserves every single consequence coming his way." A murmur ripples through the crowd, shocked by my clinical detachment. However, I continue, raising my voice to cut through the whispers. "You will not lose this sanctuary, and you will not lose your building fund." I pull a crisp legal document from the inner pocket of my blazer and place it flat on the wooden podium. As of this morning, I have successfully liquidated my parents' primary estate and seized their remaining assets. Combined with the capital from my grandmother's private trust, I have secured the entire stolen $250,000. Every single cent is accounted for. The congregation lets out a massive collective gasp of relief. Someone in the back row shouts a hallelujah. But I hold up my hand, demanding immediate silence. "I am not simply handing this money over to the Board of Elders," I announce, turning my gaze to look directly at Deacon Washington and the men standing behind him. Because the rot in this institution did not start and end with Jamal. The board turned a blind eye to his lavish spending for years. You enabled him because you benefited from the proximity to his power. Therefore, I am not giving you a bailout. I am executing a hostile takeover." Deacon Washington's jaw drops. The other elders exchange panicked, bewildered looks. "I am officially purchasing this building and the land it sits on, paying off the debt directly to the creditors," I declare, my voice echoing like thunder. "The Board of Elders is hereby dissolved. The church's assets now belong entirely to my corporate trust. Your building fund will be fully refunded into a transparent, community-managed account by noon tomorrow." I grip the edges of the podium, leaning into the microphone. For far too long, this building has been a shield for hypocrites, I say, my voice vibrating with decades of suppressed emotion. This pulpit was used to shame independent women, to silence victims, and to protect abusers who hid behind tailored suits and scripture. I stood in these very pews as a teenager and listened to that man, I point directly at my weeping father, humiliate me in front of all of you for refusing to be an obedient, silent prop in his fake society show. You all watched it happen. You applauded him for putting his wayward daughter in her place. I sweep my gaze across the stunned faces in the crowd. That era is permanently over. This building will no longer operate as a country club for toxic patriarchs. It will be restructured into a true community center serving the people who actually need it, rather than funding the egos of the men running it. The sanctuary completely explodes. It is not an eruption of anger this time, but a deafening, overwhelming roar of validation and triumph. Women in the front rows are on their feet, clapping their hands and cheering. The younger generation in the balconies is screaming their approval. The oppressive, suffocating hierarchy of the mega-church has just been decapitated in under 5 minutes, and the liberation in the room is palpable. But the venom of a true narcissist never truly dies. It only seeks a new host. From the very center of the front row, Valerie suddenly stands up. She looks entirely ravaged. Her hair is flat, her designer dress from the night before is stained and wrinkled, and her eyes are bloodshot from crying. Yet she plasters on a grotesque, strained smile, turning her back to the pulpit, to face the cheering congregation. She raises her hands in the air, attempting to absorb the applause as if it were meant for her. My beautiful daughter Valerie cries out loudly, reaching for the wireless microphone resting on the communion table to project her voice over the noise. I raised her to be so generous. I taught her to always give back to the community. She turns back to me, her eyes wide with a desperate manic plea, hoping I will play along, hoping she can salvage one tiny scrap of her ruined social standing by claiming credit for my victory. I look down at her from the pulpit, my expression colder than ice. I reach over to the audio control box resting on the side of the podium. I find the master switch for the floor microphones. I flip it to the off position. A sharp, ear-piercing screech rips through the massive sanctuary speakers, immediately followed by the heavy, undeniable thud of dead air. The camera violently tilts into a harsh Dutch angle, perfectly capturing the sheer, unadulterated horror warping Valerie's perfectly contoured face. Her jaw drops as she taps the silver microphone against her palm, the frantic hollow clicks echoing weakly only to the first few rows. The absolute control she has wielded over this congregation, over this family, and over the narrative of her entire life, has just been physically severed with the flick of a single switch. She stands there in the center of the aisle, mouth open, desperately panting for air, as the 4,000 people watching suddenly realize the beloved First Lady has been silenced by her own daughter. Panic, raw and unfiltered, flashes in Valerie's eyes. Her high society instincts, honed over 3 decades of ruthless social climbing and public relations spin, instantly kick into overdrive. If she cannot verbally claim credit for this miracle, she will forcefully perform it. She drops the dead microphone onto the plush red carpet and lunges forward. Her arms spread wide, her face stretching into a grotesque, exaggerated mask of weeping maternal pride. She rushes the wooden steps of the pulpit, aiming to wrap me in a suffocating, tearful embrace, desperate to project a touching picture of family unity and religious redemption to the thousands of smartphones currently recording her every move from the pews. I do not flinch. I do not step back. I stand at the very edge of the pulpit, an immovable pillar of white silk, and simply raise my right hand. My palm presses flat against her chest, stopping her frantic momentum dead in its tracks. The physical rejection is so stark, so undeniably cold, that a collective shocked murmur sweeps through the sanctuary. Valerie freezes her arms suspended awkwardly in the air, her face inches from mine. Her eyes dart wildly, silently begging me to play along, pleading with me to uphold the sacred, unspoken code of protecting the family image at all costs. She expects me to bow to the pressure of the audience. She expects the obedient daughter to surrender to the public spectacle. Instead, I reach into the inner breast pocket of my blazer with my free hand. I withdraw a crisp, heavy manila envelope and press it firmly into her trembling hands. Valerie looks down at the thick parcel, her desperate smile faltering. For a fleeting, delusional second, I can see the greedy calculation return to her eyes. She thinks it is a contract for a new trust. She thinks it is the deed to the church. She thinks it is a blank check designed to save her from the absolute financial ruin her husband has plunged them into. Her manicured fingers claw at the metal clasp, ripping the flap open with undisguised urgency. She pulls out the thick stack of legal documents, her eyes scanning the bold black text printed at the very top of the first page. Notice of eviction. The blood drains completely from her face, leaving her complexion a sickening ashen gray. Her hands begin to shake so violently that the heavy legal paper rattles in the quiet air. She flips to the second page, her eyes widening in absolute terror as she recognizes Jamal's frantic, desperate signature at the bottom of the property transfer agreement. In the dead of night, while she was busy trying to salvage her shattered reputation in the parking lot of a ruined wedding reception, her husband had signed away the very roof over her head to cover the massive federal debts he owed. He had legally surrendered their sprawling multi-million-dollar estate in Buckhead directly to my corporate holding company. I lean forward, closing the distance between us until my lips are hovering just inches from her ear. The congregation leans in collectively, straining to hear, but this moment is entirely off microphone. This moment belongs exclusively to us. You wanted me out of my penthouse by Monday so your scammer son-in-law could have a view. I whisper, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy register that slices straight through her soul. You thought you could strip me of my sanctuary to fund your pathetic illusion. So now I am stripping yours. You have exactly 30 days to pack up 30 years of your toxic, miserable lies. Valerie opens her mouth to speak, a ragged, breathless sob catching in her throat. But I do not give her the chance to form a single word. And Valerie, I add, my tone absolutely devoid of a single ounce of empathy. Do not take the appliances. They belong to me now. The devastation is total. The last remaining pillar of her identity, her wealth, her home, her status, collapses into dust. Valerie's knees buckle beneath her. The expensive, tailored fabric of her ruined dress crumples as she falls backward, missing the steps entirely and crashing heavily into the front pew. The legal documents scatter across the red carpet like fallen leaves. She does not try to stand back up. She simply clutches her chest and begins to wail a loud, ugly, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated defeat that echoes off the vaulted ceilings of the megachurch she no longer rules. I do not offer her a hand. I do not look back at the broken, weeping woman in the front row, nor do I glance at the shattered, cowering man hiding behind the pulpit. I have completely dismantled the throne of their hypocrisy, and the reign of their generational trauma is officially over. I turn my back on the altar. I descend the steps with slow, measured precision. The massive congregation parts before me in absolute stunned reverence, creating a wide, unobstructed path straight down the center aisle. I walk through the heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary, stepping out of the suffocating darkness of the church and directly into the brilliant, blinding light of the bright Atlanta sun. A rapid, chaotic montage sequence immediately hijacks the screen, matching the relentless, unforgiving pace of the Atlanta news cycle. The camera pans across a sweeping, sun-drenched shot of the Atlanta skyline before aggressively cutting to a barrage of digital screens. Smartphones scroll frantically through viral social media feeds. News anchors with grave expressions dominate local television broadcasts. The headlines flash in bold, undeniable typography across the screen. Fake VC arrested at lavish Atlanta wedding. Local deacon resigns in disgrace. Buckhead mansion foreclosed in million-dollar embezzlement scandal. The digital chatter is deafening. The mighty have fallen and the entire city is watching the wreckage burn. The frantic montage abruptly cuts to absolute pristine silence. The camera smoothly transitions back to the present-day interview setup. I am sitting perfectly relaxed on the expansive ivory velvet sofa in the center of my penthouse living room. The morning light streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm golden glow over the expensive minimalist decor. I take a slow, deliberate sip of Earl Grey tea from a delicate porcelain cup. The quiet in this room is not just an absence of noise. It is the hard-earned peace of total victory. 6 months have passed since I walked out of those heavy church doors. 6 months is exactly how long it takes for a carefully constructed, decades-old illusion to completely evaporate into nothing. The federal justice system moves with a terrifying speed when handed an airtight case decorated with a bow of undeniable wire fraud. Preston's high-priced defense attorneys took one look at the mountain of forged documents, the proxy server data, and the offshore routing numbers I provided, and immediately advised him to take a plea deal. He did not even get the chance to put on a show for a jury. Preston Kensington, the fake billionaire who thought he could intimidate his way into my family's wealth, was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. He traded his custom-tailored Italian suits for an ill-fitting khaki jumpsuit. There are no vintage wine tastings or country club mixers in cell block 4. Chloe's spectacular delusion shattered the very second the judge brought down the gavel. Her $4 million wedding reception is now nothing more than a viral punchline on the internet. With Preston's assets completely frozen and seized by the federal government, she was left with absolutely nothing. The trust funds were gone, the credit cards were declined. She had the baby a healthy little boy, but she brought him home to a cramped, dingy, subsidized apartment on the outskirts of the city. My sister, who once turned up her nose at anything that lacked a designer label, is now working 40 hours a week, folding clothes at a discount retail store just to keep her electricity turned on. But the most pathetic chapter of Chloe's downfall happened just 2 months ago. I set my teacup down on the glass coffee table, leaning forward slightly as I recall the absolute audacity of her final attempt at manipulation. She showed up unannounced in the lobby of my building, pushing a cheap stroller and carrying a trash bag stuffed with baby clothes. The concierge called up to the penthouse, and I agreed to meet her in the lobby. I did not invite her upstairs. I stood by the marble security desk and watched my sister completely unravel. She demanded that I take the baby. She did not ask. She demanded. She stood there crying crocodile tears, claiming she was entirely too stressed and mentally exhausted to raise a child in poverty. She pointed a shaking finger at me and told me it was my responsibility to raise her son because I was the one who put his father in prison. She told me I had the money, the space, and the resources, and that keeping the baby was the least I could do to make up for destroying her fairy tale. I looked at the child sleeping peacefully in the stroller, and then I looked dead into Chloe's frantic, entitled eyes. I told her I would absolutely not be taking her son. I told her that for her entire 30 years of existence, Valerie and Jamal had shielded her from every single consequence of her reckless, selfish behavior. They had coddled her, funded her delusions, and enabled her toxic vanity. I refused to continue their legacy. I looked my sister in the face and told her that for the first time in her pathetic life, she was going to have to take full responsibility for another human being. She was going to learn what it meant to struggle, to sacrifice, and to put someone else's needs above her own obsession with status. I turned my back on her tantrums, walked into the private elevator, and left her standing in the lobby. She has not attempted to contact me since. I pick up my teacup again, letting the warmth settle in my hands. The siblings have faced their reckoning. The scammer is rotting in a cell. The toxic aunt is dealing with her own federal indictment for attempting to drain Big Mama's account. The Board of Elders has been dismantled, and the church building is currently undergoing a massive renovation to become a secular community outreach center under my corporate banner. But what about the parents? What about the architects of this entire disaster? Marcus steps quietly into the living room, breaking my train of thought. He is holding a small stack of the morning mail. He places it respectfully on the edge of the coffee table before offering a polite nod and retreating back to his post. I sift through the sleek corporate envelopes and bank statements until my fingers brush against something entirely out of place. It is a cheap, crumpled, slightly stained envelope. The handwriting on the front is erratic, desperate, and undeniably familiar. It is Valerie's handwriting. I flip the envelope over my eyes, narrowing as I read the stamped return address in the top left corner. It is not a country club. It is not a luxury high-rise. It is not a suburban estate. The return address belongs to a severely underfunded, overcrowded county homeless shelter in the absolute worst district of downtown Atlanta. I slide my perfectly manicured fingernail under the flap of the abrasive, low-grade paper. It tears unevenly a jagged edge that perfectly mirrors the chaotic desperation of the sender. The letter inside is 5 pages long, written in blue ink that smudges across the cheap college-ruled lines. Valerie's handwriting is frantic, pressing so hard into the paper that it leaves deep physical indentations on the other side. She begins by informing me that they have finally been moved out of the county shelter. They are now living in a cramped, subsidized, low-income senior apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. She describes the cracked linoleum floors, the smell of boiled cabbage in the hallways, and the absolute indignity of sharing a communal laundry room with people she once wouldn't have even looked at through the tinted windows of her luxury SUV. She wants me to visualize her suffering. She wants me to feel the texture of her misery. For the first 4 pages, Valerie unleashes a torrent of familiar, suffocating venom. She accuses me of conspiring with the devil. She blames me entirely for the stress that caused Jamal's recent highly publicized collapse and subsequent hospital stint. She paints herself as a tragic, holy martyr, brutally betrayed by the ungrateful daughter she claims to have sacrificed everything for. It is the exact same self-righteous rhetoric she spewed from the pulpit for 30 years, just stripped of its designer packaging and massive audience. She tells me I have ruined my father's sacred legacy. She tells me I am a monster for leaving my own flesh and blood to rot in squalor while I sit in a multi-million-dollar glass tower. But then comes page 5. The violent, aggressive tone shifts with whiplash-inducing speed. The venom dissolves into a pathetic, cloying desperation. The fierce matriarch vanishes, replaced by a beggar. She lists mounting medical bills. She details Jamal's failing heart and her own supposed undiagnosed nerve damage. She insists that God has spoken to her in a dream, revealing that I am still meant to be their financial savior, despite my transgressions. She asks for a monthly stipend. A meager $20,000 a month, she writes, pitching it as if she is doing me a profound favor by asking for such a fraction of the wealth I stole from them. The Steadicam begins a very slow, deliberate push-in. The lavish, sunlit penthouse living room behind me gradually falls completely out of focus. The ambient, muted noise of the city traffic far below fades away until there is absolutely nothing but absolute ringing silence. The frame tightens relentlessly, isolating my face entirely against the blurred background, capturing the cold, unwavering certainty locked in my eyes. I do not feel guilt. I do not feel the familiar, suffocating grip of obligation that used to dictate my every waking moment, forcing me to shrink myself to fit into their grand production. Instead, my mind drifts back to the warm, raspy voice of the only mother who ever actually protected me. I remember sitting in the dark, mahogany-paneled office of my attorney watching Big Mama's final video testament. She had looked straight into the camera lens, knowing with absolute certainty that this exact day would eventually come. She knew they would try to bleed me dry from the gutter, just as they tried to bleed me dry from the mansion. She had smiled, her gold tooth catching the light, and delivered the only commandment I will ever need to follow. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Protect your peace, baby girl. I looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall with chilling intimacy. People think that cutting off toxic family members is a grand one-time cinematic event. They think you have one massive explosive argument, slam a heavy door, and walk away forever into a peaceful sunset. But that is a lie. Severing ties with the people who brought you into this world is not a single action. It is a boundary you have to wake up and consciously choose to enforce every single day. Society will try to shame you for it. Religion will demand that you honor thy father and mother, conveniently glossing over the scripture that commands parents not to provoke their children to wrath. The guilt will inevitably try to creep in during the quiet, lonely moments, whispering lies that maybe they have changed, maybe they have suffered enough, maybe this time it will actually be different. It will not be different. A parasite does not change its fundamental nature just because the host finally walks away. It simply gets hungrier. I do not write a response. I do not call the prepaid mobile number she frantically scribbled at the bottom of the final page. I refuse to give her the supply she is so desperately craving. Even negative attention, even a rejection, is a currency to a true narcissist, and Valerie's accounts with me are permanently closed. I neatly fold the 5 pages of emotional extortion and slide them right back into the stained envelope. I reach into the top drawer of my glass coffee table and pull out a heavy self-inking rubber stamp. I press it down hard over her handwritten return address. The loud, definitive thud echoes sharply through the quiet penthouse. The bright red ink bleeds heavily into the cheap paper, leaving a stark, undeniable message covering her name. Return to sender. I toss the envelope casually onto the silver tray for Marcus to drop in the outgoing mail. I stand up from the velvet sofa, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my crisp silk trousers. I walk slowly across the vast expanse of the room, my heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood until I reach the edge of the floor-to-ceiling windows. I place my hands behind my back, standing tall, completely unburdened, and utterly untouchable. The brilliant afternoon sun washes over me, casting my reflection faintly against the pristine glass. I look down at the sprawling, chaotic beauty of the Atlanta skyline. The skyscrapers gleam like monuments of glass and steel. The traffic crawls endlessly along the concrete arteries of the metropolis. Down there, hidden somewhere in that suffocating sprawl, are the ghosts of my past, scrambling for survival in the very world they used to look down upon. But up here, the air is clean. Up here, the silence is beautiful. I take a deep, cleansing breath, my eyes scanning the horizon, silently surveying the city that I now practically own. The camera pulls back, executing a wide, sweeping shot from directly behind me. The frame captures the sheer magnitude of the breathtaking Atlanta skyline stretching out for miles beneath the pristine glass of my penthouse. The sun is beginning its slow descent, painting the clouds in vibrant streaks of violet and crushed gold. The city hums with relentless energy, a sprawling grid of ambition and survival. Slowly, the camera begins to orbit around my position, tracking smoothly along the polished hardwood floor until it captures my profile and finally my face. I am not scowling. I am not gritting my teeth in anger or bracing for the next familial attack. For the first time in 30 years, I am offering a completely genuine, undisturbed, peaceful smile. The heavy, suffocating armor I have worn since childhood has been permanently discarded. I breathe in the cool, conditioned air of my sanctuary, feeling an absolute, undeniable sense of lightness. The truth is, true victory does not look like the petty materialistic triumphs my mother always worshipped. When I officially took control of Big Mama's corporate trust, the total valuation sat at exactly $15 million. It was a massive fortune, the kind of generational wealth that my parents would have immediately incinerated on depreciating liabilities to impress their peers. If Valerie and Jamal had gotten their greedy hands on those accounts, the money would have vanished into private jet leases, custom Bentley fleet upgrades, and superficial mega-church vanity projects designed solely to feed their insatiable narcissism. They would have paraded their false blessings around Buckhead until the federal government inevitably came knocking to repossess it all. I did not buy a yacht. I did not purchase a fleet of sports cars. I did not cover myself in diamonds to prove my worth to strangers who do not care about me. I operated in absolute silence, applying every single ruthless business instinct I had honed over the years of fighting for my own independence. I aggressively reinvested the capital. I acquired undervalued commercial properties in up-and-coming districts, funded high-yield tech portfolios, and ruthlessly cut out the bloated predatory management fees my father's crooked bankers had hidden in the fine print. Under my strict, unyielding management over the last 6 months, Big Mama's original $15 million estate has rapidly compounded. The trust is currently valued at a staggering $25 million, and it continues to grow every single quarter. But accumulating wealth for the mere sake of hoarding it is exactly the kind of toxic dragon-like behavior that poisoned my parents' souls. Big Mama left me her fortune because she knew I would use it as a weapon for actual tangible good, not as a fragile shield for my own ego. And the greatest, most poetic piece of this entire operation involves the primary asset I seized from my parents during the hostile takeover. The sprawling multi-million-dollar Buckhead mansion, the very house where my mother tormented me, the house where my father held his hypocritical prayer breakfasts while actively embezzling funds no longer exists as a monument to their vanity. I gutted the property completely. I tore down the restrictive walls, ripped out the gaudy imported marble they loved so much, and fundamentally rebuilt the entire estate from the ground up. Today, the heavy iron gates at the front of the property do not feature the fake family crest my parents fabricated to look like old money. They feature a sleek modern bronze plaque that reads, "The Ruby Center for Black Women Entrepreneurs." I named it after Big Mama. I transformed their toxic temple of judgment into a state-of-the-art tech and real estate incubator exclusively dedicated to funding mentoring and elevating minority women. The grand dining room where my mother used to publicly humiliate me for being single is now a high-tech boardroom where young Black women are actively pitching multi-million-dollar software startups. The lavish backyard where my father hosted his fake charity galas is now a networking campus for women who have been marginalized, overlooked, and discarded by their own families or by society. We offer seed grants, legal defense funds for women leaving toxic marriages, and aggressive financial literacy seminars so no woman ever has to depend on a scammer like Preston for her survival. I gave them the sanctuary I never had growing up. This is the ultimate payoff. Destroying Preston's pathetic scam, legally evicting my parents, and decapitating the corrupt leadership of their megachurch were all necessary actions to protect my peace. But the true sweetest revenge was not simply watching their empire of lies burn to the ground. The sweetest revenge was taking the very greed they tried to use to destroy me and weaponizing it to build a fortress for women exactly like me. They tried to bury me under the weight of their expectations, completely unaware that I was a seed. Every single tear they caused, every single moment of isolation they inflicted, only watered the soil of my ambition. I look out over the city one last time before turning my gaze directly into the camera lens. I step forward, bridging the gap between my world and the audience watching. My voice is steady, resonating with absolute, unshakable conviction. If your family treats you like you are hard to love, let them go. Stop breaking your own heart trying to earn a seat at a table where they only serve disrespect and conditional affection. The table they refuse to let you sit at is usually built on rotting wood anyway. Do not beg for their scraps. Do not shrink yourself to make them comfortable in their dysfunction. So go out there, secure your capital, protect your peace, and buy the whole damn building. Fade to absolute black.